Well, just want to say welcome. Um, totally appreciate you. Um, oh, there we go. I think we're in our webinar presentation. My name is Brian Clement, and just want to appreciate you taking the time to show up to our webinar here, CASEL Competencies and Educator Resilience. As we launch, today will be a pretty quick sit and get, not my traditional training. So even the webinar interface is something that I'm learning. So I appreciate your patience with me as we get through today. I do invite in our Zoom protocols for you to use the question and answer option that you see there as well. And I will do my best to get to those questions and leave time at the end. We have about 45 minutes here together today. This session is being recorded, so I will go ahead and both share the recording as well as a PDF of the slide deck and additional information and resources. So I wanted to keep the front end a little light with plenty for us to explore after our time here together today. So my name is Brian Clement, and I am Director of Programs and Partnerships at Dovetail Learning, where we are proud to share We Are Resilient with you here today. Since I will be talking a little bit, I figured you should know who I am, where I'm coming from, and how I'm coming in. And that starts with my family. That is my Lola and my pop-up. They're pictured in Thailand circa 1964. My grandmother from the Philippines, having met my grandfather while he served in the Philippines at the time, was a pretty high-ranking lieutenant colonel in the Army, especially for being a man of color. This is what motivates me. This is what fills me up. This is my family and I. It's my 5th grade son, kindergarten daughter there, the blonde, and 1st grade daughter. I also use this as a total disclaimer that they can come in at any given moment. So we will roll with the Zoom reality, especially as they, here in California, start their lunch after 3 hours of online learning. And I guess too, appreciation that living in California, that was this past summer, though we were in shelter in place, a lot of outdoor space to enjoy ourselves. And of course, my wonderful wife and partner. And then just a sort of professional note here, what you see is an image of me in the capital of Sacramento doing policy education work with a group called 4CA, California Campaign to Counter Childhood Adversity. That photo is now from probably a few years ago, but just as an indicator about my curiosity and involvement in trauma-informed education over the years, as well as my sort of lived commitment to be both in the policy zone as well as the practice, right? So hit them high, hit them low. And then what I love to share here is where those two worlds meet, the nexus of praxis. And more about me along the way. Today, we will be doing, as I mentioned, sort of a webinar style sit and get format as a high overview of our approach. We are resilient. And then I will be directly correlating that to the competencies that CASEL outlines and some of the context. Also, a little bit about us, Dovetail Learning. I love to work for a company that not only has these missions and visions, a vision of world-kind connected human beings, but also the mission of strengthening resilience in adults and children. For well before we began the shelter in place and COVID, these are the things that we've been working towards. These are the things that we've been living, and just appreciation for a company that tries to model the care that we want to share with the world. And that starts with something I'm super proud to say about everything you're going to hear here, is that our work is an open educational resource. Over a decade in the field of social emotional learning, with our flagship program, we know and honor that the context and the people who use the work and do the work are all unique. And so we invite a spirit of sharing and collaboration in this approach, which is an open educational resource that we've done through Creative Commons. That is a share and share alike attribution. So please use and apply the work. And we'd love to hear more about how it's working for you so we can then share it out to others. So we can sort of be a hub for sharing and growth together. All that being said, We Are Resilient is a practical skills for lifelong wellness, right? We've put together a program, but we wanted to make them concrete skills, things that don't exist only in the theory plane, but rather are grounded in research, but are actionable, things that we can do together. So that being said, it's a brief origin story. And here, because they are a headlining part of this, is CASEL, as emblematic of this concept of social emotional learning. As a former teacher and principal, I was fortunate to spend a number of years learning, applying, and teaching and sharing a tier 1 social emotional learning program that brought me through a number of states, even international contexts, and a lot of people who see and appreciate social emotional learning. Also in a lot of different capacities, if that makes sense. So that the awareness is that PBIS happens in a system, right? Or social emotional learning happens in a construct. Never did I arrive at a school where there wasn't some version of wonderful program going on. So through an appreciative inquiry partnership model in our consulting, we were able to help support the structures, culture, and climate with social emotional learning as a lever for that. And then additionally, even though it flew in a little early, I use ACEs connection and adverse childhood experiences and trauma. I use that sort of imagery to talk about how we're also feathering in or informed by our awareness of trauma. And I'm certified ACE interface presenter with the County of Sonoma, as well as in equity dimensions, happen to be part of Equity Council, Child Care Planning Council, et cetera. So a lot of complexities here. But through our offering and approach, we call it We Are Resilient. The take-home message is that together we can do this, right? Even the language starts to inform how we can work together. As a quick snapshot, these are our skills and patterns of the approach. I guess this is a good program overview in the sense that we wanted to operate in our skill set, our strength-based, asset-based, research-based skills for personal resilience. And additionally, we added in connecting and collaborating as things that I can do or an individual can do to strengthen a relationship or contribute meaningfully into a group. But also, as we began to explore, we wanted to locate resilience and our reactive resilience, the things that we do as part of our resilient story, right? So that my behaviors and patterns, which we'll explore more, how I externalize my behaviors, are also informed by my cultural patterns that we see here. So our cultural patterns, if we're looking at how we view the world, leads to our own understanding of self. And I truly appreciate within the CASEL framework, people talking about the healthy identity, right? And understanding that in a context over time. And that ultimately, that informs our formative years, informs how we react to the world. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work, The Body Keeps Score, is hugely it moves the work, I guess, and that we react and move in ways that are understandable based on our experience. Additionally, as we get to learn more about ourselves and our story, that we can make some concrete choices in how we create the world, right? So that's what our skills grouping is there. Now, we call the program We Are Resilient, and it was and is a nod to the evolution of our language and coaching through PBIS. Instead of be safe, be respectful, becomes we are safe, we are respectful, and ultimately we are resilient. And so we talk about resilience as a spectrum, and it has different ways that it manifests itself. and that resilience is dynamic. I can be more or less resilient in any given time and space. I can be more or less resilient in my relationships, in groups, and culture. And so what we see down there is that this arc of resilience, right? What we do to create safety, create meaning, preserve identity is understandable. And even if we react in a way we don't want to, there's a reason for it. But these protective patterns in service to our reactive resilience, or they manifest as a function of our reactive resilience. Our centering skills can strengthen our personal resilience. So this arc here, the imagery is skills supporting that dimension of resilience, connecting skills for relational resilience, collaborating skills for group resilience, and awareness of cultural patterns so that we can, over the course of multiple generations, pass on patterns that are more resilient and being called for, especially now with all that we have going on in this world. And that ultimately, it's one of my favorite quotes, my wonderful colleague and executive director, Dr. Charles Fisher, that we all have impeccable reasons for behaving exactly as how we do, and we all have impeccable reason for being exactly who we are, right? Because this is the human condition there. And all in service to this concept piece that really kind of lands our work within what CASEL calls focus area 2. And in my consulting and programmatic rollout, I feel like it is the area of growth. As we go, so do the children, right? And that it needs to be strengthened and grown for ourselves, for the students. And that we have specific strategies to do that. Our deployment model is relatively simple, right? Practice, model, coach. We offer different ways to expose people to this model to become proficient. We have direct instruction, sort of sit and get training, more interactive direct instruction training, as well as Resilience Circle, which is a 6-week model focusing on our sort of protective patterns and centering skills and creating a safe place to work the work, I guess is a good way to say it. And in my invite, I will allow you guys to the opportunity to sign up for some of our current educator resilience circles. And in the concept of modeling for adults, right? To help others learn from you. And we really highlight and drill down into the idea of a coping model for what modeling is. It's not dysfunctional and it's not perfect. It's very human, right? To humanize and normalize what we're experiencing with the invitation to be vulnerable and explicit about what is happening internally, how I can make explicit for others, my colleagues included, my family and students, what I do on the interior domain to make it on the exterior. So verbalizing, making transparent our thought processes. And then ultimately, as we move on, become more proficient and efficient, using curiosity and appreciative inquiry and encouragement to be the change. Now, this is where we're going with it. I'm only going to pause here for a little bit because I know it's sort of a graphic overwhelm, but real quickly, we can see here the 5 areas of the competencies that CASEL enumerates, a brief window into how our program maps into that, but this is the run here that we'll be doing for the rest of this webinar. And those competencies, as CASEL has released and grown their resource bank, just big shout out to what they're doing, how they're doing it, that these competencies sit in a context. And that school climate, especially here in California, is part of the LCAP idea, but we are resilient, right? Even the language pattern of the human dimension of all that's represented on this infographic, right? That these competencies happen in and among through everything that we do. And so that for that reason, we talk about we are the agents, we are cause in this matter. as Chuck, as we call him, he and I were discussing this, right? How can we be that for ourselves and for others? So we're going to start with our patterns at the highest out, right? So now, similar to how the context of the CASEL competencies look, we're going to kind of start wide and get a little more granular. Here we see this concept of social awareness, right, as it is named there. And we will make all the handouts available post-fact, lots more than you'll see here, but you will get a copy of this particular slide deck for sure. So social awareness, right? Ability to understand perspectives and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. So our response to that is what we call our cultural patterns. It's how we view the world. It's that multi-generational transmission of values, both good and bad, the shortcuts of our life. And that culture exists on many levels, as was indicated by that sort of larger CASEL framework, right? School-wide culture and practices, what are we doing there? How are we as adults and grown-ups focusing and in partnership with authentically with families? And that there is a community engagement of being held together for a mutual learning and modeling. Cultural patterns are infinite. This is just a few samples of the ways in which cultural patterns and our formative experiences influence us. There's going to be some there that we aren't listed in anything. All of the things that we can be doing in consideration of who we are. And more specifically with that imagery of the resilient nature, what do I want to pass on to our next generation, right? So a concrete example of this is as a former athlete, competing in high school in the mid-90s, I became more aware through education and growth and exposure and experience some of the misogynistic, patriarchal, homophobic through lines of that cultural experience. And I have the opportunity to choose to model for my son and my daughters a different way, right? So how our cultural patterns are all very much influential and embedded in service to the social awareness that CASEL needs. And then as we talk about social awareness, we then kind of narrow in just a touch on our own self-awareness, right? The ability to understand one's own emotions and thoughts and values as they manifest in behavior across contexts. So we have what we call our protective patterns. And our protective patterns are how we react to the world. There are externalized behaviors. And so that reactive resilience appears as our protective patterns, but we will still want to honor that they are forms of resilience. It's ultimately in service to our safety that we evidence these. And as we become more aware, how can we reflect on that awareness in a non-self-judgmental way? For instance, as we move into this next slide, very concretely, here are the buckets that we placed these protective patterns into. And I use the term, I'm an attacker. It's part of my being. I know where I learned it. But I used to get really stuck in a shame cycle after something that I did where I wasn't being my most resilient self. Because when you talk about resilience in a spectrum, it allows me to honor the ebb and flow in my responses. And instead of thinking of a bad, I shouldn't have, that doesn't make sense, you should never be angry, how do I actually move through that anger and make a choice not to be so reactive and attacking? Okay, so reacting and attacking are all part of ways that this shows up. And I also want to talk about within the last year, because we launched in January past, that defending wasn't originally on our list, but through our engagement, through our beta testing, through our circles, and our open educational invitation to growth and learning, we ultimately added defending to help people locate themselves and identify and put a name to some of the patterns that they'd like to be more resilient, or they see that as a growth edge. So our protective patterns. And then this concept of self-management, right? The ability to manage one's own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. And we talk that a little bit about is what we call our centering skills, right? If I can manage myself in my own sphere of influence, it really is being centered. And from that centered place, we can make choices and create the world in response that we want. And that each of these skills are in service to my own personal resilience. And that I can choose and commit and practice these to stay centered and not get pulled off through others. And from a centered place, I am better able to then meet and build relationships and grow relational resilience and group resilience. And here's our offering of skills. We didn't invent these, and you might know them, use them, apply them by any other name. But this is the skill set that we found allows us to find center, to choose to do something in a moment, to ultimately work against our own reactivity, though we can honor it and use distrusting if it's going to serve us not to get scammed on a credit card call, for instance, right? So that's part of our whole evaluation in our program is our protective patterns really are there for us, and there's always a weighing of it. And if we decide we want to make a choice and move past our trigger or not engage, what are some of the skills? And in a non-linear way, I can become better at, and through practice, accessing these skills in real time. One of my wonderful colleagues, Christy, talks about practicing breathing before you need it. And ultimately, that's what it takes, right? Because Steph Curry doesn't hit the game-winning three-pointer if he's never practiced a day in his life, right? So using, applying, that is the art. Those are the concept pieces of self-management, the actual doing of it. And so we also learn where we're not great. And I'm looking at letting go before I advance the slide. Letting go is a growth edge for me. It's a skill I'd like to engage more and get better at. And through work and application, I can. So staying centered and applying skills for my own personal resilience. And when I'm centered and when I'm feeling more resilient, I am open to relationships, right? Relationship skills. And I think just to hover here a bit is why we wanted to expand the concept of strength-based, research-based skills for my own needs in service to those in a relationship, because we are not in a vacuum, doing mindfulness practices or trying to stay centered, beneath a cherry blossom tree on our own. But rather it's happening in a very dynamic way with our colleagues, with other students, right? That is a skill in and of itself to manage, especially when you have an idea of how things should be going or what would be better for you if that person was or was not a certain way. So actually our ability to be centered helps us through our connecting and collaborating, right? And we can build and make choices in resilience around relationships or relational resilience or group resilience, which we'll kind of explore here. Relational resilience is a place from which I, from a center place, can strengthen a relationship, and that acknowledgement that relationships can also both be weaker or stronger or have higher resilience or not. My high school best buddy, don't see each other often, sometimes years, unfortunately, between our actual get-togethers. But that relational resilience is so strong that we just bounce right back in together. Or with my wife and I, over 14 years, we can be apart and come back together, versus someone I don't have as much time and experience with, where the slightest misinterpretation or miscommunication, I get defensive, I get reactive, right? So we just call that a low or weak relational resilience, but I always have the choice. And if you notice here, there's a dimension of parallel between noticing the other person and myself at the same time, right? So I have to be sort of fluid in my own awareness of self and my centered level, and how I'm able to then connect and offer my heart through listening in a generative, connective way. Need the skills of being centered and noticing myself and such that I can empathize. And that I always have that choice. I have a choice to be kind. And the skill of speaking authentically, not just leveling your truth out there. And as a recovering attacker, or trying to be better and more resilient self, for a while there, speaking my truth was at the cost of a relationship, or not an authentic, vulnerable way, which is part of how we practice the skill of speaking authentically to get better. And as we progress through, we again see this parallel, that a group in and of itself has almost a relationship ometer, or dynamic and personality that it's evidencing, and things can be generative and working together as a function of the great multiple relationships and relational resilience in and among people. But that we can also be conscious in our own actions of how we can notice the group as a whole, as a personality, how I can then appreciate and send appreciating for others. And there's a whole work to be done, especially when we're talking about school-wide social emotional learning systems pieces, about seeking agreements, just really being explicit about our mission, what our roles are individually and mutually, and then moving into the honoring of those agreements ultimately. And the hope is that we're all contributing intentionally. And that sort of idea is when a team is using and leveraging, and at Dovetail Learning, we talk about everyone's genius. My colleague, Mary McCoy Thompson, who's our COO, she's so wonderful, so linear, so concrete, makes me better and leverages my genius in certain ways. And collectively, how we leverage, early childhood ed specialists and Ashley, what we're doing in our lenses that we all bring, that together we are sort of better than one, right? That's the ultimate sense of collaborating at the highest level. And we see that and feel that, and hopefully you're a part of an educational community or experience where that known and felt sense of collaboration and generativity is what we're all working toward. It's tricky because I can be more or less resilient on a given day. For instance, just last night, I had to work on my own centering skills through a school board meeting that was happening about reinstatement and what that means for my 3 children, and fingers crossed that all of them are on the same schedule and not split across the A and B and alternating. So I had to become aware that I was getting off center, because as someone who is off center is going to be difficult to work with. And it's through relationships and through collaborating, we actually can give someone else more resilience and be that caring, buffering, nurturing relationship, because we all need each other, especially in these unique times. All right, a little long there because we covered a couple of important skill sets together. And then this idea of responsible decision making, right? The abilities to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions across diverse situations. I think that really speaks to what we were talking about. Being centered in a vacuum is much easier than in the dynamic world that we all live. And so I guess one could say that our sort of programmatic culminating theme is about developing a resilient mindset through this curated set of research-based skills. And what you see here is our sort of 1, 2, 3s of a resilient mindset. If I can be curious, right, approach the situation, myself, the other person with curiosity, with wonder, right? Then I can stay in that curiosity long enough to wonder, assess, and then choose a way forward, choose a skill, choose a practice but that it's ultimately going to take some commitment and work and trying and retrying for me to maintain that resilience and be new to the situation each time. So resilient mindset is what we're trying to coach ultimately, and that the skills are in service to that, but it takes a little bit of a 1, 2, 3 and time in. And as I mentioned, this concept of practice, and totally want to give credit to Tal Ben-Shahar, who now I think a few years ago now, all of a sudden, really kind of put me onto this notion that, Socrates has a quote that says, "To know good is to do good." And he sort of shakes his finger and says, well, that's not really true, is it? Because we know we're supposed to eat, right? We know we're supposed to work out, and yet we don't. And that the theologians of the time actually had a better playbook for moving ideas into action, right? Knowing is a cognitive moment. And as we learn, as we grow, how do we take that knowing and hope and target and move it in to practice? More recently, BJ Fogg's work, Tiny Habits, kind of has this thread, but it's through reminders, repetition, and ritual. And I can use the term ritual in quotes because, for instance, I have a relatively ritualistic coffee habit in the morning, however you want to say that, and that I now have the practice and repetition with the reminder when I hit go on the brewing of the coffee, that is where I've built in my breathing mindfully habit, a little stretch and spine work, wake up, and it's just a few minutes right when the coffee goes on to brew. So how are we going to be cause in that matter? And sort of to scale back out to this larger concept of social emotional learning and systems and CASEL, where and how are we each at our level of influence moving towards the practices that we know will be beneficial for all, for our staff? If we talk about wellness, what does that look like? I'm pretty sure I see Dr. Rahr on here, and I love her term, individual wellness plan. How is one actually committing to the practice and repetition and reminder of wellness for our staff? And we talk about nurturing ourselves, right? How are we doing that for ourselves and creating, in the context of connection and collaboration, the opportunity to talk about nurturing ourselves, not just telling someone to do that, right? Trauma-informed theory tells us we need to do it with, not to or for, but with one another and together. So how do we apply? And that we ultimately, right? We are the cure. It starts with us. We are cause in the matter. And I've said that a few times because it really resonated with me in preparation for this, because it cuts to the heart that everyone on this call in every moment has the opportunity to find their center, build relational resilience with others, and ultimately in service to our group and our collective cultural resilience, we have these opportunities to be of service to one another through our interactions each moment. All right. It's rare that I don't get to have that dialogue, so I appreciate you guys putting up with that definite sit and get. It's not traditional, but it's also part of how we want to talk about our program, and we'll have lots of follow-ups opportunities here to do the practice and share the resources. So with that, and I appreciate Susan, you jumping in. Adriana, I saw you there coming in from New Zealand, and obviously to someone sharing. I think I've seen David in a few other webinars throughout the time. Great moves. And yeah, the mindset. So just want to invite any active other questions. I think I'm answering you here, Maria. Yes, we will have resources and a PDF of this webinar here. So go ahead, and I invite any questions that you might have now specific to this program. And as I just pause there a bit, I guess, and this will be reflected in my follow-up, we are seeking partnerships. We have historically had a strong presence in K-12 as a company, And we are fortunate that we're funded through ACEs Aware as an initiative, working with clinicians in our own resilience to mitigate the effects of the vicarious trauma that we're all experiencing, compassion fatigue, and ultimately what we call, surge depletion with how long this prolonged shelter in place has been. And just to answer the question there, Dovetail Learning is the authors of the program We Are Resilient. So our full team, all the geniuses have been leveraged, and what you will see is a tremendous amount of resources available on our website for free download. And so proud to say that we are the authors. Dovetail Learning is the author of the program We Are Resilient. So there you have it. Thanks for the question. And yeah, one more is that we will be offering opportunities for more of a training and resilience circle, which we will send in in the follow-up. And we found too, as Adriana mentions there, if you can see it, repeated exposure is all about how we learn. And it's part of it, true, right? It's part of my own growth edge. Part of the learning dynamic is that that there's new ways I can learn about myself, and that's part of that resilience commitment, right? During the shelter in place and being the 5 of us, right? 3 children, my wife, and even my dog, all in the same space. I became more aware of my defensive nature versus my attacking nature, which is part of what I'm working to improve on. And thanks, Adriana, for your testimonial and support. And yes, we will be sending, this is recorded, so we will be sending that to you as well. And of course, we'll give you plenty of opportunities to follow up with me directly in their in the follow-up. A question about active state chapters. We are building our network of providers and coaches. We are launching currently our first cohort of clinic-based coaches and are seeking partnerships and sharing opportunities for people in other states. Would love anyone from New York, who I see there, Susan, yes. We would love to connect and offer up the opportunities to share, but we don't have those official chapters, but you're officially our friend if you use and apply our work, and I can give you some more official opportunities through our early cohort coaching cohorts, and even the Resilience Circle that we'll be offering starting Friday. And hopefully it still works for the East Coast times there. And again, thank you, Adriana. So if there's aren't any more, those are great questions, do appreciate it. I'm also happy to say and appreciate that we'll be ending just shy of our 45-minute window here, but there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to connect and understand more about our program over time. And so I'm going to then end the meeting here, and so appreciate your time. A recording will be sent likely tomorrow with a number of resources. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful, what is today? Wednesday. And we will be off together. I just want to give a full shout out in space. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Look forward to more. And please reach out to me. You will see my contact information. And I mean it. I mean that we would like to connect. We want to learn and partner and grow together. So thank you very much. And call for anything.